Okay, so today our presenter is Looney. He was born into fundraising as the son of two of the country's most respected development professionals. Now in his 16th year with CCS, Chris maintains responsibility for managing the firm's operations in Southern California. Chris has assisted more than 250 major fundraising initiatives, raising hundreds of millions of dollars for organizations large and small. Chris serves a diverse portfolio of clients across the nonprofit spectrum, including schools and universities, hospitals, museums and symphonies, social service agencies, and faith-based communities. Chris is a member of the CCS Training Institute faculty and frequently lectures at conferences across the country, and we are very happy to welcome him here to the library today. So please join me in welcoming Chris.
Thank you, everybody, and it's good to see some faces that I recognize from this morning, which was a great presentation, but also one that I've done more than once. So that was more of a performance. This is not something I do out of sort of the can, so you'll have to help me a little bit with some questions that I think you might have, because I want it to be helpful to all of you. I mean, campaigns are different for every organization. It's different whether you are in a social service or environmental sector. It's different depending on how involved your board might be. It's different depending on the kind of fundraising mechanisms that you have. So I really will benefit from your questions so I can really be most helpful to the types of organizations you work with in thinking about this sort of magical topic of campaigns for organizations that have smallish staffs, smallish budgets, maybe have never done campaigns before, or maybe just don't have sort of the resources that might be available to some of the larger institutions. And so I'm really anxious to have this conversation with you and see what kind of questions you do have, and see, I hope, of course, that there's something that you can take away that will be really helpful. There's enough content, so that shouldn't be a problem. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I would encourage any of you to ask questions at any time. Because it's being recorded, I'll probably have to reframe the question back to you just so it's captured on video. So don't feel awkward if, why is this guy repeating everything I say? I just want it to be very participatory. If I've talked to you for the next couple of hours without any engagement, then I failed. Okay, so don't let me fail. And I do have to sort of figure out how to run through these slides, and I figured it out using a mouse, so that's good too. So we're all set. Just by way of background, you heard that I come from a fundraising family. This morning I explained that the genesis of this concept I had around a 5-tool fundraiser, sort of the Hall of Fame type fundraiser, came because of my mom is sort of what I consider to be the best fundraiser in the world. I just learned from her, and so I'm going to share a lot of the experience that I have coming from that sort of fundraising background, but also just some of the clients that I've worked with most recently who are themselves tackling fundraising campaigns, special initiatives outside of annual fundraising, and for them, you know, it's an extraordinary undertaking. And it does seem daunting, but it is achievable, and I would be willing to bet that it's similarly achievable for all of you. We have the benefit as a firm of working with organizations large and small across the country. I have a certain territory, but we're all over the place, and we do a lot of assessments, a lot of feasibility and planning studies, and mostly campaigns. But the campaigns we work on, we're hired to largely be the campaign director. So we're either there for 6 months or 12 months to run the campaign almost as a staff person. And it gives us great sort of experience and exposure into the inner workings of a campaign. But interestingly, the fundamentals of a campaign, whether it's $1 billion campaign, like some that we're working on, or $1 million campaign, really don't change. It's very similar. You just sort of strike some of the zeros away. Maybe you don't have prospect lists that are as large. You don't have volunteer structures that are as cumbersome, but nonetheless, those kinds of things stay the same. And what we're known for is sort of these transformational efforts. That's what we get really excited about. Moving the needle for an organization, helping them do more with their mission and with the communities that they serve. So what are we trying to accomplish? I certainly want for everyone to understand what some of those key ingredients are in a successful campaign. I want to communicate how you can be successful with limited resources, as the name of the presentation would tell you. Some best practices around how to succeed with small organizations, and specifically around realizing some of those bigger gifts that would define most campaign efforts. Also, how to engage more people in the work that you have, more volunteers, more board members, other people, so that it's not just a staff-driven effort. And then I wanted to kind of walk through a case study that we're currently working with the South Coast Botanic Garden in Palos Verdes, California, where we're doing an assessment for them, and they're weighing how to raise money for a rose garden project. And so to use that as sort of a case study in how we're going to put together a campaign for that. So what are some of the characteristics of a successful campaign? Let's walk through it a little bit. First, you need to know what a campaign is, right? And the way I view a campaign is that it's an extraordinary event in the life of an organization that is for a time certain period, hopefully it's less or on target, that is over and above what an organization might need to raise annually to keep the lights on, to pay staff, to function with its programs. So it's sort of adding a whole new layer of fundraising on top of what already exists. So that's why it becomes challenging, because you say to yourself, oh, we're an organization, we're already stretched so thin doing what we already are expected to do. How can we possibly do more? And I totally get that. So that's what we're here to explore. It is very intensive. It's meant in some ways to raise multiple times what you raise every year in a pretty short amount of time. You might raise a couple $100,000 as an organization over the course of a year, yet in this campaign, try to raise $1 million in 1 or 2 years. So it's an extraordinary and intensive effort. And it should involve a lot of different constituencies. No matter what those are, you're probably going to be looking at every single possible source of donations you can, and it's not exclusive to any one kind necessarily. Even if you are an organization that doesn't necessarily have an emphasis on corporate gifts, normally there might be a role for corporate gifts in a special campaign. So the key is to ask yourself the question, why would we launch a campaign? Is there an alternative? And so some of these are questions that I would be asking if I was an organization considering a campaign, to determine if you're ready, if you're capable, if it's the right thing to do. So, like, what type of campaign? Is it a campaign that is over and above annual, like I described, which describes most campaigns for organizations that are smaller? Or is it a comprehensive campaign, like would be for the University of Arizona or one of the local hospitals, where they might count every dollar that's raised over a certain period of time? So that's the definition between a comprehensive campaign and a standalone or over and above campaign. So you might hear all these people talking about our comprehensive campaign. Well, really what that means is they're just counting every dollar that comes into the organization for a period of time. They might still have these extraordinary needs along with their annual fundraising, but they're going to count it all. And that's how some of these organizations like UCLA recently came out with their $6.2 billion campaign that they'll probably raise over 10 years. And it's because every dollar that comes in, and it would be not only philanthropic dollars, but it would also be research grants and other sources as well. But anything that comes in, they're going to count. Most of the campaigns that we're talking about are standalone. And is it going to be a major gift campaign? Most of the campaigns that I would be recommending and talking about, and sort of the ones we're talking about today, are designed as major gift campaigns. It's not 1,000 gifts at $1,000 or less. It's really probably 50 to 100 gifts at some of the larger gift levels. And really the way I see it is that the annual fund is really the place where you push and try to get all of your lower dollar supporters to come into, and hopefully over time grow them up the ladder and have an opportunity to solicit them for a major gift down the road. the campaign should really be seen as that extraordinary opportunity to make a big impact with bigger donors. So what is that role of annual giving? It's a great question. Is it folded in? Is it kept apart? Who from the annual fund, who among your donors are to be solicited? Do we need the expertise of an outsider to help guide us in the process? Some do, some do not. Is there enough staff resources that can be applied to this? I mean, no matter what size the campaign, it is more work than you have today. And you have to be prepared for that. So if you're raising $1 million and your budget might be, let's say, $50,000 to raise that $1 million, what amount of money is there that should be put into additional staffing, even if it's part-time or more limited, to help you accomplish that extra work? Is there the consensus to proceed? I have a lot of campaigns that are either completely board-driven or volunteer-driven, or completely staff or executive leadership-driven. And I would say that one or the other, having one or the other, but absent the other, is not good. You want for the entire organization to be behind the effort. You don't want to be pulling board members and volunteers and donors along. You hope that those volunteers are pushing you to make it happen. And internally, you can't have resistance to the idea as well. The two groups really do need to be working together and pushing each other for success. I just see a lot of campaigns where the organization feels an obligation to do something, and there's a lot of resistance on the part of volunteers and boards, and then it becomes a staff-driven exercise. And that's really the danger, is that it becomes too much of a staff-driven exercise. Campaigns are really unique because they're meant to be very volunteer-led and oftentimes driven exercises as well. What's going to be accepted? You know, the policies of an organization might say, for example, that we can accept estate commitments and count estate commitments, and yet in a campaign, if you're trying to build something that needs to be completed next year, what good is it to count a state commitment that might not come in for 20 years if you need the money today? So you sort of have to develop the policies that will enable you to be successful, and a lot of that is the types of gifts that you're willing to accept in a campaign effort. And you have to ask the question, is this the best and only way to move forward? Oftentimes it is. And I think it's a question that you ask so that you can confirm with other people that, yes, we've explored all the other options, and at the end of the day, the campaign is the way that we really should go. So what are you trying to accomplish in a campaign? I mean, first and foremost, I think it's an opportunity to advance your mission. It's essentially a way to do more as an organization and to accomplish something really specific. So the outcome is so important. And by outcome, I really mean the impact of the work that needs to be accomplished. I mean, you wouldn't do it if it didn't have meaning, if it wasn't significant and important to either the organization or the community. So it has to be focused on that. I think it should also be focused on the strategic plan of the organization. I mean, you shouldn't be necessarily entering into a campaign for something that you think is important, but isn't a part of the strategic plan of the organization, which begs the question, do we have a strategic plan? Yeah. And so you might want to back up and say, before we enter into this campaign effort, which is really going to, or could, sap a lot of resources, let's make sure it's a part of that plan and the future vision of the organization. I think it's so important, too, to be able to say to prospective donors, the reason we're doing this is because it helps us accomplish our long-range plan. And we're very intent on being successful in realizing that vision, and this is the cornerstone piece, or one of the more important pieces to being successful. I mean, meeting the goal, the financial goal, goes without saying, right? I mean, if you're going to raise money through a campaign and you set a goal of $1 million, you got to hit that target. In theory, there shouldn't be much success that can be derived if you're short the goal. The exception might be an endowment campaign. And there are organizations that say we need to grow our endowment, another $1 million or $2 million. And that would be a smallish campaign, but if you raised 1.5, no one's going to really be that upset. It was a good effort, we raised some money. But if you're trying to build a new shelter and you need $1.5 million and you only raise $800,000, and as a result you can't build the shelter, that's really tragic. So it goes without saying that you're designing these campaigns to be successful from a fundraising perspective. But I think it's an opportunity to really engage and involve a heck of a lot of people, which is really exciting. I know most organizations are looking for future board members. This is a way to plug people in and evaluate whether they would make great board members for the future. So getting a lot of people involved is a great opportunity through a campaign. I think it's also a great opportunity to raise the level of awareness that exists for your organization in the community. It's also an opportunity, I think, to strengthen the annual fund, because you'll have a lot of people who you ask who say they're not capable or interested in funding this project, but perhaps they might have an interest in giving more or giving separately to the annual fund. So there is not a campaign that is meant to negatively impact the annual fund. And you'll hear a lot of people say, well, the last campaign we did, it was successful, we got to accomplish what we were setting out to do, but boy, did it kill the annual fund. And that's not what I would say is a typical experience. If anything, I think it was the easy road to go out and talk to people, probably your existing donors, and say to them, man, this is so important, we need you to give here. And they said, well, you can have my $5,000, you can either put it in the campaign or you can put it in the annual fund. And the choice probably was made to put it into the campaign, and that $5,000 gift went outside didn't go into the annual fund. Campaigns that we run always encourage the primacy of the annual fund. It's an extraordinary opportunity. It means over and above. If a donor is giving $5,000 a year to the annual fund, can you give $6 every year for the next 5 years to the organization, $5,000 to the annual fund, and then we'll take the additional $1,000 a year and put it to the campaign. But you can't rob Peter to pay Paul in these campaigns. It has to be very distinct and very separate. And I think the request messaging that goes out to prospective donors has to be very clear about setting those two distinctions. The campaign we're doing right now, it's really fun because we've decided that our goal is to make 3 requests in every ask that we make for the campaign. The first is to secure the annual support of that individual for at least a year, if not 3 to 5 years. And there's a lot of people that are giving $1,000 to this organization. So, it's locking in maybe a $5,000 gift to the annual fund over 5 years. We're also making that extraordinary request for the campaign, and maybe that's another $5,000. And then the third request is that we're asking everybody to consider joining the Legacy Society, which would be the Wills and Estates group. And when we're successful, we kind of give each other high fives that we sort of just turn the triple play, if you will, in fundraising, which is to secure 3 gifts in one shot. It's becoming more and more common, but it's a consideration in your campaigns. I think campaigns are a great way to build your major gifts program. So a lot of organizations will do events, they'll have their direct mail, they'll do other fundraising activities, but what is missing oftentimes is this pool of major gift prospects or donors. And the campaign forces an organization to build that major gift pipeline, portfolio, and be focused on it. So a lot of times we'll counsel organizations, if you want to build a major gift program, don't just think, let's start it one day and we'll start building a prospect list and these things. Really start with a specific initiative in mind, like the Rose Garden Project, which is $1 million, and say, let's start there, let's build the major gift program around that, and after all is said and done and the money's raised, you'll have those donors to steward into the future, and hopefully solicit again. But you'll also have all those people you never asked, never got to, weren't interested in this, but you can keep on that list and keep cultivating them and soliciting them for the next project. And that begins the major gift process. And that's how you can build a philanthropic culture, too, within an organization. I mean, And organizations that receive big gifts, they just sort of stand a little bit taller and a little bit prouder for whatever reason. And so you get a little bit of that success behind you, and it's amazing the kind of momentum and confidence you can generate. So campaigns can do that. And I think it helps showcase your work, certainly, in the community. So elements critical, and we're going to go through a lot of these. You have to pick a goal that's challenging. Probably not something that you can easily accomplish, but something that is a little more challenging, but still has to be achievable. And oftentimes it's difficult to find that right amount, and I'll tell you some techniques to figure out how to do that. You need to have a strong case that's compelling and urgent. The rationale for why you're doing this is so critically important. You need to have sort of the donor in mind when you're creating the messaging around a campaign. And you have to remember who it is that you're selling this to. So it's very important that you create that talking points document, that case for support that's specifically targeted to the right audience. There have to be enough donors, or prospective donors. I mean, you're not going to raise $1 million unless from one donor. Probably, if you are, that's great. You probably aren't sitting here for this kind of presentation. You might need to be in the how to succeed in transformational gifts or principal gifts, not necessarily major gifts. But there have to be a sufficient number of prospects. And I'm going to show you a table of gifts. And you can see the number of gifts at different levels that might be required, and the number of prospects that you also need to have to be successful. In the morning session, I got a good laugh about out of how failure is so common in our industry. In fundraising, you fail far more than you succeed. And even if you fail 7 times out of 10, you're still a success. And the same is true in campaigns. You're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get a lot of people who give you far less than you would have hoped. And the only way to counteract that is to have enough prospects and ask them for enough money. As my dad likes to say, you know, hey, we're just going to throw enough spaghetti on the wall and some of it's going to stick. And that's really what it is like in fundraising. You got to get out there and ask. So you also need a good plan. Something that talks about the budget and how long it's going to take and what the organizational structure is like. And I'm providing all examples on all of these so we can go through them. But you need good leaders, good volunteers. You need training for them, you know, so that they're not ill-equipped for the job that you're asking them to do. And a lot of it just has to do with materials, arming them with the right things. I think there has to be a commitment of time internally to make this all happen. Good community awareness. I mean, people need to know what you're doing, right? And I think oftentimes you need some experience and some good advice. Someone needs to be really helping you through this, and it doesn't require someone on site full time. It doesn't even require someone engaged with you on a weekly basis. That doesn't hurt. And sometimes the goals are sufficient that it is necessary. But you know, getting good advice is pretty easy. You know, you have forums like this, you have AFP, you have people in the community who've been through campaigns. There's lots of advice out there. So there are a number of things that I would recommend you think about before launching a campaign. And these are the 9 things that I want you to focus on. And some of them might seem like they would not be things that you might be able to accomplish on your own, but they very much are. All of these things are designed to be achievable by an organization of any size. You just have to sort of set your mind and to do it. But you've got all of these different things, and let's just go into them. I think the first thing to remember that is in any good campaign, whether it's $1 billion or $1 million or less, these are the 4 fundamentals that must be applied and must be a part of any campaign. First, you have to have that compelling case for support. The second is leadership, external leadership as well as internal leadership. It's assumed that you've got some good people internally that can help make this happen, but pulling the external leadership is great. The prospects and the plan. You'll hear me come back to that over and over again. If you don't have anything else, these are the 4 things that you really want to emphasize and focus on. And the first thing that I would really ask you to consider and to think about is to do your own little planning study. In our business, we call it a feasibility and planning study. That's certainly the name that we put on it when we present that as an option for service. And in those cases, let's say an organization is trying to raise $10 million, and they're saying, well, we've never done a campaign before, but we have this need. Is this something that we can do? Well, we will test that. We will talk to a bunch of their key stakeholders. We'll help them develop all of their messaging and all of these things. And we'll go out and we'll test it, and we'll come back and we'll have findings, we'll have recommendations, we'll put together a campaign plan, and we might also have an enhanced case for support. So this is what organizations do when they have $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to spend on that kind of process. Trying to raise $1 million, you're an organization that's spending every dollar you can just on program. You're not going to spend that kind of money unless you get a grant from a foundation to do that kind of capacity building. And those exist, by the way, too. You can get foundations to give you money to help you deal with capacity issues. And studies like this or assessments are one of those ways. But let's say that's not an option for you. I think you still need to do the planning. It's sufficiently difficult to raise, let's say, $1 million, that you wouldn't want to just go into it blindly. You'd want to do some planning. And to do a modified planning study is a great exercise to accomplish. And what you want to accomplish all of these different things, but the goal would be to assess your readiness, of course, to gauge the attitudes and reactions to your organization and plans. It requires you to formulate your thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish. So putting down on paper what you want to do and what the impact will be. So it's a great exercise, nonetheless, just to get you to start thinking about what all this means. It helps you identify campaign leadership, determine interviewees' interest in volunteer financial support. Identifying obstacles is a great opportunity here to develop the campaign plan and design donor recognition, plan the initial solicitation. So all of these are key objectives of any planning study that you might be trying to accomplish. And for the organization that doesn't have the resources to hire an outsider to do that, this is what I would probably do. I would think about identifying maybe 40 or 50 individuals that I think would be maybe the best leaders, the best prospects, have the most interest in a project like this. So if for example, we were trying to raise money for the Rose Garden at the Southwest Botanic Garden, I would want to interview a number of board members, and then we're talking about staff doing this, or the executive director or development people, but figuring out people. It would be board members, it would be the people that are already on a Rose Society, it would be past donors, it would be some other large community philanthropic-minded people. But I would put together a list of who you would probably target in a campaign, and I would develop that sort of background information statement, and I would create an interview request letter, sort of I want your advice, so I'm going to send you this letter along with some of our background information, and I'd really like to just spend a few minutes. And I would design a kind of a questionnaire that of key questions that you'd like to ask. And I would go through a process of interviewing, for lack of a better word, completing strategic conversations with those 50 folks. And it's going to be unbelievably helpful in terms of giving you a sense of where those people are in terms of their own priorities, and if this is something that they would consider as a philanthropic priority. Would they give to it? Would they be a leader in this process? It answers a lot of key questions. And I will tell you that if you want to get money from people, you ask for advice. This is probably something you've heard before. But if you want advice, or if you're trying to avoid getting advice, ask them for money. So this is a process that hopefully enables you to start building a relationship with really important people. and engage those people and make them feel like they're a part of sort of the ground level of this process. And you're going to eliminate some people who just aren't interested, and you won't have to waste any more time with. But it's just one of those great cultivation opportunities that you should explore. And I recommend it to anyone. If you want to get to someone and the ultimate goal is money, stop thinking about the dollar signs right away. Start thinking about how you can get in front of this individual to ask them some questions, to ask for advice. So my recommendation is get out and ask for advice, especially among the people that you hope to attract to your organization. They're much more willing to spend time with you if they feel like you can give them advice. Please.
I'm just wondering, I've often heard that at this stage, this is a time when you're also trying to gauge their financial level of support. How do you sort of do that without already making the ask in this feasibility stage? How do you get that information?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
So the question is, in this particular stage, how do you understand their philanthropic capacity or philanthropic interest in your project? And it all comes from the questionnaire that you develop. And there are a couple of questions that are a part of any type of exercise. You start out by asking about their understanding of the organization, what they think about the organization, how they've been involved. Then you sort of transition to what they think of the project that you're proposing, right? So if we're thinking about 5 different phases, phase 1 is just general thoughts around the organization. Number 2 is their specific ideas and thoughts about the project that you're presenting to them and their reactions to it. The third is questions designed around a potential campaign. How does the goal of $1 million sound to you? Does that sound achievable or reasonable? I have some tricks of the trade, some tools that I often use, like I'll present them with a table of gifts. I'd say, this is sort of what it looks like to raise $1 million, and you can see that we have a couple of gifts at $200,000, another gift at $100,000, X number of gifts. Does this sound like something that's achievable for us? And do you have any thoughts about that? And then does it now seem like a good time to move forward with a campaign? Any reason in the community to think that we shouldn't be moving forward with this? So you have those questions, and then the next question is about other people. So you start asking questions about, so who are the people that we should be talking to engage them in a leadership capacity? And I'm not just talking about your friends or who you can connect this to, but we need to bring some bodies into this to help us accomplish our goals. Who are those people? We need to find a chair. Who would be a great chair? We need to find someone to help us with corporate gifts. Who would be a great corporate liaison? Those kinds of questions. And then, who are the people that can give, or we should be thinking about as prospective donors at these different levels? Can you think of someone who could maybe consider a $200,000 request that might have an interest in the kind of work that we do? And they might say, no, I don't. I don't know people. And one of the other things we usually do is bring a list with us of some kind of list. It could be the organization's donor list. It could be the board list. It could be the people that you're inviting to participate. But put some names in front of them. And, I remember this one study interview. We had a list of 100 people on a page. The person took the sheet and he said, okay, I'm going to put a check if they would be a great leader. I'm going to put a number of dollar signs to determine the type of gift. So $4 signs means $1 million plus. $3 signs means $500,000. And I came back with this list at the end of it. And I was like, I have my prospect list. I have my prospective leadership list. So you want to engage people in that kind of activity and let them, run with it if they're willing to. Then you get to the magical sort of sets of questions and say, I'm not asking you for a gift at all. Don't get me wrong, but we are trying to figure out if we can do this and if we should. And if this project moves forward, is this something that you might consider giving to? And they'll either say yes or no. And you say, is it possible to estimate what you might consider doing? And they will tell you. And oftentimes it'll be, well, I see myself on the lower end of this table, or I really have to talk to my spouse, or there might be some other things that they might say, but you've got them thinking. You've got them thinking. And some you might be surprised because there are some people who say, this is the kind of thing that I'd probably give $50,000 to. And you're like, well, did I just hear that? And then you kind of go back and then you start thinking, okay, how soon can I go back and ask them for the gift? It's kind of like one of those things that you see in the movies, like, is it too soon to call? I just met her. Is it too soon? Maybe I have to wait 3 days? So, anyway, but that's a great problem to have. And so those are the kinds of questions that you want to be sure to ask. And you've got to figure out a way that you can record all of those answers. But this exercise helps you build the prospect list and do so much more. So it's really a valuable exercise, and there's no reason why any organization should be prevented from doing it. I think you would do the same kind of exercise if you were testing out your strategic plan or involving people in developing that. It's no different in developing a campaign plan as well. All right. So then you come time to setting the goal, and I think most goals are set out of need, right? And that's dangerous because our need is often far greater than what we can accomplish in a single campaign effort. So you have to be really careful. Plus the other challenge is if you set a goal too large, then a lot of people will just laugh at you. They'll think you're ridiculous. And this happens a lot. These organizations that raise $500,000 a year are saying that they're going to have a campaign to raise $50 million. I mean, $50 million. I mean, on average, it's probably 4 or 5 times their annual fundraising. So if you're raising a couple $100,000, $1 million is not outside of the realm of possibility. If you were to raise $50 million, I sure hope you have like a $45 million lead gift, because that might be the only way that you can accomplish that kind of campaign size. So you really have to be very careful about setting the goal size, because it's also, there's nothing really magical about that number from a scientific standpoint. There's no science really in fundraising. There's lots of best practices, but oftentimes goals are achieved because people think that they're realistic and achievable, and people won't give to something that just seems impossible and will be scared away. So oftentimes if you have like a $10 million need, but a part of that is various projects that add up to that, then we're going to be looking at phasing, right? So you might have a first phase goal of $1 million. Once you get through that, then you can move on to phase 2, which might be a couple $1 million, and then phase 3 might be $5 million. So every campaign effort that you have enables you to build and build and build to a point where you can do more and more. So again, I just want to caution you not to focus on the need so much, but set a goal that really is based in reality. And one of the things that we will look at later is this table of gifts, right? I mentioned it as part of the study, but $1 million campaign does require you to have a pretty significant gift at the top of probably $250,000 or something like that, and then maybe 1 or 2 more at 100. And for every gift you need, you're probably going to need 3 to 4 prospects. So let's say in this table of gifts, we've identified the need for 40 gifts at maybe $5,000 and above. Well, that means that we have to identify at least 120, maybe 150 prospective donors that we're going to ask during the course of that campaign for very specific amounts, and the specific ask is important. And let me tell you, making 150 asks is not easy. I mean, it can be done in a year. I've seen it done by a couple of people. In one campaign, we were trying to raise, the goal started out at $6 million. They've raised about 7.5. And the executive director and the campaign chair literally made 85 asks in 1 year. And they also had a lot of meetings that weren't asks, but were more cultivation or education visits as well. So they must have doubled that in terms of the number of meetings that they had. So it can be done, but I would also tell you that the executive director was not really focused on anything else for that period of time. So just realize too that the more gifts that you need, especially at more significant levels, the more time you're going to need to have those meetings. And And of course, what happens is, you have all these prospects, you're like, let's go, and then you're like, oh, this person's going until August, and this person said that they need till the end of the year to meet, and so things happen as well. But you do need to have enough prospects to set that goal. Then in terms of the case for support, I mentioned the fact that it should be rooted in your vision and strategic plan. So if you don't have one, a strategic plan that is, make it up. Most of them sit on a shelf anyway. No one asks to read them. So come up with some defining sort of vision ideas and come up with some strategies to accomplish them and call it your strategic plan, and then go out and raise some money. It doesn't need to be anything that fancy, but I just want you to be able to say that what you're doing is a part of your plan, your organization's plan. And the case really is that rationale, and would describe the sort of progression of your organization.